August 12, 1987, around 4 in the afternoon, the Presidio Post Exchange, San Francisco. It's a military shopping center on one of the most prestigious army bases in the country. Families browsing the aisles, picking up groceries, household supplies, the kind of ordinary Tuesday afternoon that doesn't make the news. An army captain named Larry Adams Thompson is shopping with his wife Michelle and their 3-year-old daughter. The girl's walking between her parents, and she suddenly stops. She runs to her father and grabs his leg. She's shaking. That's Mikey. Adam Thompson looks up. Across the store, he sees a man he recognizes, a lieutenant colonel that he knows from a previous assignment at the base. It's a military intelligence officer. The captain picks up his daughter and he carries her towards the exit. He's a bad man, and I'm afraid. They get into the parking lot. The lieutenant colonel and his wife come out of the store behind them. The girl sees the woman. That's Shamby. Family drives home. The girl tells her parents that she's afraid Mikey and Shamby will come to the house and hurt her. That night, the Adams Thompsons call the FBI. Now here's what distinguishes this from every other child abuse case in 1987. The man the 3-year-old identified wasn't a teacher or a janitor. He wasn't some civilian contractor with a questionable background check. He was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army assigned to military intelligence, specializing in psychological warfare. He held an above top secret security clearance. He wrote classified doctrine papers for the Pentagon on how to psychologically manipulate entire populations. And in his off hours, he was something else entirely. He was the founder and high priest of an organized satanic religion called the Temple of Set. He performed black magic rituals in the underground crypt of the Heinrich Himmler's SS castle in Germany. He designed his occult order's insignia in Eva Braun's private tea room at Hitler's Eagle's Nest because, in his own words, he wanted the environment to be magically appropriate. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, and the little girl who pointed him out at that army store wasn't the only child who had something to say. Over the next year, at least 58 children at the Presidio's daycare center would show signs of physical and mental signs of SA. 5 of them, toddlers, tested positive for chlamydia. The children were described as being taken to private homes. They described rituals. They described blood. The FBI investigated. The San Francisco police investigated. The Army's own criminal investigation division investigated. Nobody was ever convicted. Not Aquino, not anyone. The building where the abuse happened burned to the ground on the autumnal equinox. The case files are still riddled with redactions. And the official explanation, the one that ended up in the history books, is that it was all some part of just a satanic panic, mass hysteria, overzealous therapists planting false memories in children. But that explanation don't hold water for me. For one thing, mass hysteria doesn't give toddlers a sexually transmitted disease. So I'd like to know what exactly went down at the Presidio. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History. This is the Satanist that the Pentagon protected. So who was Michael Aquino before any of this happened? Well, on paper, the guy was impressive. Born October 16th, 1946 in San Francisco. Eagle Scout, graduated from UC Santa Barbara in 1968 with a degree in political science as an ROTC Distinguished Military Graduate. That's a designation that gets you a regular Army commission, not Reserve or National Guard, but regular Army. It's the fast track. He goes to Vietnam, but he's not carrying a rifle in the jungle. He's in psychological operations, PSYOP. That's the branch of the military intelligence that deals with influencing enemy populations through propaganda, disinformation, manipulation of information. The goal isn't to kill the enemy, it's to make the enemy want to stop fighting, to convince entire populations that resistance is futile. Aquino's good at it, climbs the ranks, comes back to the States, earns a master's degree, then a full PhD in political science from UC Santa Barbara in 1980. He gets assigned to the Presidio of San Francisco as an active guard reserve officer. He's working at the headquarters of the 7th Psychological Operations Group. In 1980, his commanding officer asked Aquino to draft a paper. Wants fresh ideas about where PSYOP doctrine should go after Vietnam. The old playbook, leaflets, loudspeakers, isn't cutting it anymore. Aquino writes the paper, his supervisor reviews it, makes annotations, they go back and forth. The final product gets distributed to the Pentagon offices, intelligence agencies, and military commands. The paper is called From PSYOP to MindWar, The Psychology of Victory. The word in that title, MindWar, Aquino coined the term himself. He admitted later that he got the idea after watching Star Wars in '77 and thought the name sounded futuristic enough to replace the somewhat bland Army designation of psychological operations. But the content isn't science fiction. It's a serious doctrinal proposal, and what it argues is disturbing. The paper says conventional PSYOP has it backwards. The military makes its strategic decisions first and then brings in the propaganda people to support those decisions after the fact. MindWar flips that. Psychological dominance comes first. You achieve victory by convincing the enemy that he really wants to bring his national policies into harmony with ours. If that works, you never have to fire a shot. Bullets and bombs become the last resort. Sounds reasonable so far, maybe even enlightened, but here's where it gets darker. MindWar doesn't just target enemy soldiers, it targets all participants, which means enemy populations, neutral populations, and unfortunately, friendly populations, meaning Americans. The paper acknowledges that under existing US law, PSYOP units can't target American citizens, but then it argues that MindWar is something different from PSYOP. Something bigger, something that operates through mass media, through strategic communications, through what Aquino calls the stated promise of the truth that the United States has resolved to make real if it's not already done so. In other words, you don't lie to your own population. You just decide what the truth is going to be and then make them believe it before it happens. This paper circulated through the US military establishment in 1980. Aquino later said that he saw it being put to use during the First Gulf War and even more obviously during the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And he wasn't embarrassed by it, he was proud. So let's take stock for a second. We have a man with a PhD in political science, a decorated Army intelligence officer with top-level clearances, a specialist in the science of psychological manipulation who wrote a paper proposing that the military should be in the business of controlling what populations think. A man whose professional life was built around understanding how to get inside people's heads. Great. Want to guess what he's doing with his evenings? 1969, San Francisco. Aquino is a young Army officer freshly back from Vietnam when he meets a man named Anton LaVey. LaVey is the founder of the Church of Satan. You may have seen his photos, bald head, pointed goatee, black cape. He founded the church in 1966 out of a black Victorian house on California Street. The media dubbed him the Black Pope. Most people wrote off LaVey as a showman, a provocateur, and honestly, a lot of it was fair. LaVey's version of Satanism was more theatrical than theological. He didn't actually believe in a literal Satan. It was more about ego worship, indulgence, and rejecting Christian morality. Celebrity members would drift in and out, Sammy Davis Jr., Jane Mansfield. It was considered edgy dinner party stuff. But Aquino wasn't a celebrity dabbler, he was a true believer. He joins the church and rises fast. By 1971, he's a magister of the 4th degree. He's the editor of the church's newsletter, The Cloven Hoof, and a member of the governing council of 9. That's the inner circle. He's 25 years old and simultaneously an active duty Army officer with security clearances and a ranking official in America's most notorious satanic organization. Nobody in his chain of command says a word. Now Aquino and LaVey, they start butting heads. Aquino thinks LaVey is cheapening Satanism by selling priesthood degrees for cash. He thinks LaVey's aesthetic approach misses the point. Aquino doesn't see Satan as a metaphor, he sees the real deal. So in 1975, Aquino quits the Church of Satan, and what he does next is pretty intense. He performs a ritual, an invocation, and according to Aquino, Satan shows up, and not in a cloud of sulfur or horns or with a pitchfork. According to Aquino, the entity communicates directly with him and delivers a message. I am not the Satan of the Christians. My true name is Set. I am the ancient Egyptian god of darkness and chaos. The name Satan is a corruption, a bastardization of my real identity. Aquino claims that during the ritual, Set dictated a sacred text to him through automatic writing. He called it the Book of Coming Forth by Night. In it, Set allegedly declares Aquino the magus of a new aeon, a new age of enlightenment through the darkness. Then he commands him to build a new temple. And that's exactly what he does. He founds the Temple of Set. This isn't the Church of Satan 2.0. It's more structured, more serious, more organized. The Temple of Set operates like a fraternal order. It has 6 degrees of initiation, local chapters called pylons, suborders dedicated to specific occult disciplines, a formal priesthood, and international membership. The core belief is that Set granted humanity a gift, something they call the Black Flame, which is individual consciousness, the ability to stand apart from the natural world and shape your own reality. Members pursue what they call Zephyr. It's an Egyptian word meaning to come into being, self-directed evolution towards godhood. They called their path the left-hand path. In occult tradition, that's the path of individual power and self-deification, as opposed to the right-hand path, which is the surrendering to a higher power. Christianity is right hand, Buddhism is right hand, the left-hand path says you become the god. Aquino runs this organization as its high priest, while simultaneously serving as an active guard reserve officer in U.S. Army intelligence. He holds a top-secret clearance and teaches political science at Golden Gate University. He appears on national television on Oprah, Geraldo, talk shows. He's out there defending Satanism in a dress uniform. The Army knew, his commanding officers knew, his security clearance reviewers knew. The guy was the most famous Satanist in the United States military, and nothing happened. It gets even more interesting because the Temple of Set wasn't just about philosophy and self-improvement. It had a darker wing, an inner order within the order, a knighthood of adept black magicians who swore fealty beyond death to something they called the Prince of Darkness. It was called the Order of the Trapezoid. And on October 1982, Aquino took the Order of the Trapezoid into a place that should make your skin crawl. So let me set the scene for you. Walsburg Castle, Westphalia, Germany. Its 17th century triangular fortress sitting on a hilltop in the countryside. Looks like something out of a fairy tale if you didn't know its history, but if you do know its history, it's one of the most disturbing buildings in Europe. In 1933, Heinrich Himmler leased Walsburg from the local government for 100 years at 1 Reichsmark per year. He had plans for it. Big plans. Himmler wanted to turn the castle into the spiritual center of the SS, not a military headquarters, a spiritual one. He envisioned it as the Vatican of a new religion that would replace Christianity across the Third Reich. The renovations were done with slave labor from a nearby concentration camp. Over 1,200 prisoners died while building Himmler's temple. Inside the castle's north tower, Himmler built 2 ceremonial rooms stacked on top of each other. On the upper level, that's the General's Hall. It's a massive circular room with a sun wheel symbol set into the floor, 12 spokes radiating outward. You've probably seen it. It's called the Black Sun. It became one of the most recognizable symbols of the Nazi occultism. Now below it, underground, Himmler built the room that matters for our story. It's a crypt. It's a circular vault with 12 stone pedestals around the walls, a gas pipe in the center designed for an eternal flame, and channels cut into the floor that some historians believe were meant to carry smoke for ceremonial fires. Himmler called this room Valhalla, the Hall of the Dead. This is where Himmler held rituals for his inner circle of the SS generals. The specifics of what he did down there are still debated by historians. What's not debated is that Himmler considered this the most sacred space in the entire SS apparatus. Got that? Good. October 19th, 1982, a US Army lieutenant colonel walks into Walsburg Castle. He gets the keys to the crypt from the caretaker. He descends the stone steps alone into the Hall of the Dead, Himmler's underground ritual chamber, and he performs a solitary black magic ceremony. That lieutenant colonel is Michael Aquino. He calls it Walsburg working. The purpose is to formally consecrate the Order of the Trapezoid, the inner knighthood of the Temple of Set, in the place where, as Aquino's own organization describes it, the dark arts of the North were last attempted. Curious phrasing. Aquino isn't going to that castle despite its Nazi history. He's going because of it. His own order's mission statement says that he went there to recapture the positive elements of the romantic stream that tragically became the tools of totalitarianism, whatever that means. He's framing the SS occult program as a good idea that went sideways, and he's positioning himself as the guy who's going to get it right this time. What happens after the ritual is almost worse. Aquino finishes in the crypt, he goes back upstairs, returns the keys to the caretaker, then sits down at the caretaker's desk and sketches the insignia for the Order of the Trapezoid, the emblem for his inner circle of the adept black magicians. But he's not done. He doesn't finalize the design there. Instead, he travels south to the Bavarian Alps, to the Eagle's Nest, Hitler's mountaintop retreat, and inside the Eagle's Nest, Aquino finds a small wood-paneled room. It's Eva Braun's tea room, Hitler's girlfriend's private space. He sits down at a table and drafts the insignia in precise mathematical proportion. Why there? Well, in his own words, I could have done the drafting before then, but wanted the environment to be magically appropriate. Keep in mind, this isn't from an investigative journalist trying to make Aquino look bad or a letter from a conspiracy theorist. This is Michael Aquino writing on his own organization's website, describing his itinerary through Nazi sacred sites with pretty casual satisfaction. Himmler's crypt, the caretaker's desk, Eva Braun's tea room, because the vibes needed to be right. This is the same man who was stationed at the Presidio in San Francisco, the same base he wrote MindWar, the same base where the US Army ran a daycare center for the children of military families. And 4 years after Aquino performed his ritual in the Hall of the Dead, those children started talking. Late 1986, the Presidio of San Francisco. The Presidio is one of the oldest military installations in the country, dating back to the Spanish colonial era, headquarters of the U.S. 6th Army. It's a national historic landmark with views of the Golden Gate Bridge. Officers raise their families there. And like military communities anywhere, the Presidio has a daycare center, the Child Development Center. It's where military families leave their kids, some as young as 3, while they report for duty. You trust the U.S. Army with your children's safety. That's the deal. In the fall of '86, a 3-year-old boy comes from the daycare center and tells his mom that a teacher named Gary Hambright hurt him. His mother takes him to a doctor. The examination reveals physical evidence consistent with abuse. So, the San Francisco police and the FBI open an investigation into Hambright. He's a 35-year-old Baptist minister who works at the center. He denies everything. The other teacher and the staff back him up. The Army's position is that this is an isolated incident involving one teacher and one child, but that position falls apart almost immediately. The Child Adolescent Sexual Abuse Referral Center at San Francisco General Hospital gets involved. They tell the Army to expect multiple victims. The Army's response? We have no reason to believe that other children have been victimized. But the children keep talking. Parents start noticing changes in their kids. Nightmares, bedwetting, violent outbursts, sudden mood shifts and behavior that didn't exist before they went to daycare. One by one, parents take their children to be evaluated, and one by one, the evaluations come back the same way. By the end of the investigation, at least 58 of the roughly 100 children who attended the Presidio's Child Development Center show physical and mental signs of SA. 58 out of 100. That's a majority of kids. And 5 of those children, toddlers, tested positive for chlamydia. That's a sexually transmitted disease in children who were still wearing diapers. There's exactly one way a 3-year-old in diapers contracts chlamydia. The children's accounts go beyond what anyone wanted to hear. They described being taken off the Presidio base to private homes. They described multiple perpetrators, not just Hambright. Ritualistic elements being urinated on, feces smeared on their bodies, blood, threats of violence. They described being forced to watch things that no child should ever have to see. The Army keeps the daycare center open for over a year after the first disclosure. So while state-run centers get shut down at the first hint of abuse, the Presidio Center stays open while the victim count climbs past 50. And the children weren't just naming Gary Hambright anymore. They were describing other people who came to the center, people who took them places. A man and a woman whose names they pronounced the way a 3-year-old would, Mikey and Shambi. So let's go back to the day at that post exchange, August 12, 1987. You already know the scene. Captain Adams Thompson, his wife Michelle, their 3-year-old daughter. The girl spots Aquino across the store, grabs her father's leg, and identifies him as Mikey. But now you have the context. This isn't happening in a vacuum, but by this point, dozens of children have already reported abuse at the daycare center. The investigation into Hambright has been going on for months. Parents are terrified, and the Army is stonewalling. And now a child is pointing at a lieutenant colonel in military intelligence and saying that's one of the people who did it. The FBI interviews the girl the same night. An agent named Foreman conducts the interview. The girl picks Aquino out from a photo lineup. She doesn't pick out Lilith Aquino as Shambi from the photos, but after viewing a video lineup, she identifies Michael again. She tells the agent that Shambi and Mr. Gary took her to Mr. Gary's house. She says Mikey was there. She describes the house as blue-gray in color. That matches the color of Aquino's residence in Leavenworth Street in San Francisco. She describes a room with soft walls where Mikey forced her to stay and blocked the door so she couldn't leave. Now, 2 days later, August 14th, a search warrant is executed on the Aquino home. FBI agents and San Francisco police officers go through the house. They seize videotapes, cassette tapes, notebooks with names and addresses, 2 photo albums, plastic cases of negatives, 29 photographs of costumes and masks, and investigators note what appeared to be a soundproofed room, a room with soft walls. Curious. The Aquino home wasn't the only place on the Presidio that raised eyebrows. A reporter named Linda Goldston from the San Jose Mercury News does her own on-site inspection of the Presidio grounds. She goes to the military intelligence area where Aquino was stationed. Now behind that building, she finds a concrete set of bunkers that's been converted into something strange. Inside one bunker, the words Prince of Darkness are painted in blood-red letters on the wall. The number 666 is scrolled across another surface. On the floor, there's some partly burned logs. There was an enormous pentagram on the wall facing the military intelligence barracks. Black and white candle drippings are visible throughout the whole structure. In a separate building further up the street, Goldston finds a large drawing of a figure with red eyes and horns. The building's locked tight. No entrance granted to outsiders under any circumstances. They're ritual chambers on a U.S. Army base. behind the intelligence building where a self-declared Satanist lieutenant colonel has been stationed. So that's a lot to digest. But what does Aquino have to say about all this? Well, he says none of it happened. Full stop. He says his daughter was never in Hambright's care during the dates in question. He says he and Lilith were 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., where he was enrolled in a graduate program at the National Defense University. Every single day, his accuser was at the daycare center. He says Captain Adams Thompson fabricated the entire accusation to file a $3 million claim and get in on the financial bonanza that other parents had already started. He says the play therapist who evaluated the children was the same one who pronounced scores of other kids abused, and that the therapy itself planted the accusations. He says his wife was examined by Presidio doctors on March 12, 1987, and pronounced free of any signs of physical abuse. So was his little girl. That's the defense. The San Francisco police looked into his alibi, and then they closed the case. No charges filed against Aquino or anyone connected to him. Done. Elephant in the room. How does a case with 58 victims, 5 toddlers with an STD end up with 0 convictions? It's actually not complicated. You just have to watch where the jurisdiction lines fall. The U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco makes an early decision that shapes everything. They decide that the federal jurisdiction ends at the boundary of the Presidio. The base is federal property, so crimes committed on the base are federal cases. Makes sense, but here's the hitch. The children aren't just describing abuse at the daycare center. They're saying that they were taken off the base to private homes, to other locations in San Francisco. And the U.S. Attorney says those allegations fall outside our jurisdiction. That's a city matter. Take it to the San Francisco Police Department. So now you've got a split. The feds are handling Hambright for what allegedly happened on the base. The San Francisco police are handling Aquino for what allegedly happened off the base. And the 2 investigations aren't talking to each other the way they should be. The result? More than 60 children's allegations fall through the cracks, basically because they happened in the wrong zip code. Hambright gets indicted, charges dropped. He gets re-indicted on 10 counts of lewd and lascivious conduct involving 10 children. Now, the U.S. Attorney holds a press conference surrounded by Army brass, FBI agents, and announces that the maximum penalty is 96 years in prison and a $3 million fine. Then he says there will be no more arrests. Despite the children's allegations of multiple perpetrators, despite the descriptions of being taken to homes, despite Mikey, Shamby, the U.S. Attorney declares publicly that there's no other suspects. That's a strange thing to say when your own investigation hasn't even looked into the off-base allegations. The charges against Hambright get dropped a second time. The reasons are procedural. Problems with child testimony meeting evidentiary standards. He's never convicted. He's never acquitted either. The case just drops. And then comes the fires. September 22nd, 1987, the building at the Presidio complex where the child abuse allegedly occurred burns down. September 22nd, that's the autumnal equinox. Now, if you've been paying attention to who Michael Aquino is and what he practices, you know that's a high holy day in occult traditions, one of the 4 major Sabbats of the pagan calendar. Coincidence? Maybe, but 3 weeks later, a second fire hits the daycare complex. This one damages 4 classrooms, including the one that had been Hambright's. $50,000 in damages. The Army's response to all this was to hold a ribbon-cutting ceremony. April 1988, they open a brand new $2.3 million daycare facility on the Presidio. Smiles all around, while parents of abused children hold a press conference outside calling the whole thing a whitewash. The U.S. Attorney's Office issues a final statement. They would not reopen the case absent the discovery of new evidence. The statute of limitations is 5 years. And that's how 58 children, 5 with chlamydia, get 0 justice. Because the system was designed, or at least operated, in a way that made prosecution impossible. But the story doesn't end here, because a TV appearance, a powerful senator, and the Army's own Criminal Investigation Division are about to make things a lot more complicated. October 1988, it's about a year after the fires, the Presidio's case gone quiet. Hambright's charges are dead, and the San Francisco Police Department closed its investigation into Aquino with no charges. The parents are left with nothing but $74 million in claims and a daycare center that doesn't exist anymore. And then Michael Aquino goes on television. He appears as a panelist on Geraldo Rivero's Halloween special. Geraldo's doing what Geraldo does, trying to whip up hysteria about satanic cults in America. It's peak satanic panic, but Aquino's there as the voice of reason. He's pushing back, says the whole SRA thing, the satanic ritual abuse, is a witch hunt. Mass hysteria driven by bad therapists and gullible media, and he makes his case wearing an Army uniform. The broadcast catches the eye of Senator Jesse Helms from North Carolina, one of the most powerful politicians in the United States Senate. Helms isn't a complicated man on this issue. He sees a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army on national television defending Satanism and loses his mind. What happens next comes from Aquino's own FOIA filings, and it's confirmed in later federal court records. Helm contacts his close personal friend, Secretary of the Army John Marsh. The message is simple: get rid of this guy. Aquino's 20-year military record is spotless. His efficiency reports are perfect. His clearance is active, so there's no administrative lever to pull. The only real option, according to Aquino, is to revive the dead Presidio case and use it as a weapon. Now here's where the two competing narratives split so hard that they might as well be describing different planets. Aquino's version, from Extreme Prejudice, all 500 pages of it, he says the Army's Criminal Investigation Division launched a sham reinvestigation that was rigged from the start. He says the CID illegally pressured a full-time active duty board to deny him a new contract before the investigation even produced findings. He says when they looked at the Adams-Thompson allegations and found that he'd been in Washington, D.C. the entire time, they didn't drop the case. They just changed the dates. They moved the alleged abuse to a window when Aquino had been in San Francisco. And when that manufactured timeline created new problems with physical locations that the girl described, they changed location as well. He says every time his alibi checked out, the CID just rewrote the accusation to get around it. He calls it manufactured evidence. He says he filed repeated demands for court-martials for everyone involved, the chaplain for fraud. The CID conducted an independent reinvestigation. The staff judge advocate at the Presidio, Lieutenant Colonel Schwinder, reviewed the evidence and determined that probable cause existed to title Aquino for indecent acts with a child, like sodomy, conspiracy, kidnapping, false swearing. Now, titling means that CID formally concluded that a crime probably occurred and Aquino probably committed it. It's not a conviction or even a charge, but it goes on your permanent record. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals looked at the Helms pressure and said, yeah, there's evidence that political pressure existed. But the court found that the CID reached its decision to open the investigation before the high-level meeting about the Helms letter. The appellate judges wrote that the evidence of political pressure does not support his conclusion that it precipitated the investigation. So what's undisputed and what do both sides agree on? Aquino's name stays on the CID report to this day. The Army's official position, upheld through 2 levels of federal court, is that probable cause existed to believe he committed at least one offense against a child. His wife Lilith's name was removed. The children's identification of her as Shambi was deemed insufficient, but Michelle's identification held up, the 3-year-old who pointed at him at the PX. That identification survived every legal challenge Aquino threw at it. And here's the part that should bother everyone regardless of what version you believe. No charges were ever filed, period. Not against Aquino or Hambright, not against anyone. 58 children, 5 with STDs. A CID report that says probable cause exists. And the United States Army's final answer is nothing. Not even a court-martial. How about a civilian prosecution? A letter of reprimand? Nothing. I'm John Genoa. This has been America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.